Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present Chayim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
On Chayim here on Shalom TV, I have a wonderful opportunity to speak to someone who represents a position in the United States Congress. And we don't often have a chance to speak to people who are really in the seats of power in this country. But it's my great pleasure to welcome Jim Himes, who is running for his third term in Congress, the 4th District in the state of Connecticut, including Fairfield County. Jim, thank you very much for joining us.
It's great to be here, Mark.
From our perspective, some of the issues that are of concern to this audience are concerns that relate to the State of Israel, the Jewish community here in America, and to American concerns in general. First of all, you've been to Israel a number of times.
That's right.
How many times?
I've been there at least 4 times as a tourist on business, and then as a member of Congress. I've been back once when I was campaigning and once about a year and a half ago.
Okay. You were back with AIPAC?
That's right.
Okay. By the way, you're married?
I am.
To Mary? You have 2 children?
Yep.
Okay. Did they ever go with you?
Mary has been with me twice. The first time when I was campaigning 4 years ago was the first time she'd ever been there, so it was a wonderful time.
But what was it like for you visiting Israel?
Well, you know, I had always, my first time to Israel was when I was 16 years old. I was an exchange student in Jordan, believe it or not. I don't think we probably send exchange students there anymore, through a program called the American Field Service, AFS, and I'd always been fascinated with the story of Israel. So when the application came, I said, I'd like to be in the Middle East, because you could choose regions, not countries, and I thought maybe I'd get sent to Israel. I was sent to Jordan. But I did go across the Allenby Bridge to visit Israel when this was 1982, and it was an amazing experience. I'm very sensitive to history and to stories like Israel's story, so it was a very powerful experience.
That's lovely. We should just set some context. After high school, you went to Harvard.
That's right.
Then you were in Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar.
For a couple of years, yes.
Okay. So you have seen the world in a certain way, and you do bring a breadth of, obviously, experience and education. So it's interesting that you would say that you had an interest in the Middle East, and here you are sent to Jordan. How old are you?
I was 16.
16.
Yeah.
What was spending, was it a summer or what?
It was a summer, 3 months, yeah.
What was that like in Jordan?
You know, it was really amazing for a bunch of reasons. First of all, I'm not even sure I'd heard of Jordan before I got sent there. Of course, I'd heard of Israel. And it was amazing for a bunch of reasons. One was that my host family was a very well-educated, very moderate, very peace-oriented Palestinian family who had lived through the events of 1948 and 1967 and whatnot. And it was amazing getting that perspective from a very professional, educated Palestinian family that was perhaps a little different than the way we often think of Palestinians in this country. They were very pragmatic and said, look, we've got 2 peoples, we've got to find a way to live side by side. And then, of course, going to Israel and seeing the difference between an open, democratic society with a flourishing economy. It was even flourishing back then. And, you know, some of the, difficulty in development, and certainly difficulty in establishing any kind of accountable government, it was a pretty significant contrast.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding about what Congress can or cannot do, can or cannot influence in terms of foreign policy. Can you give us a primer here? To what extent are members of Congress involved in the issues which always grab the headlines, and how U.S.-Israeli policy is being played out, and what about the issues of Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon? To what extent are these issues, which really come under the purview of you as a United States congressperson?
Well, big picture first. I mean, for 240 years in this country, we've had a tension between the president and the executive branch and the legislative branch on the issue of foreign affairs, in particular on things like, the declaration of hostilities. The Constitution is very clear that the Congress of the United States declares war, but I'm not sure there's been a congressional declaration of war in, 50, 60 years or something. The president has sort of assumed that over time, role. And most people, and I think this is appropriate, recognize that the president really is the lead on foreign policy. When something happens overnight, you know, having one executive making decisions makes a lot more sense than having 535 people get up to speed. However, Congress, of course, is constitutionally supposed to declare war. It does control the budget. And has a very loud voice on these issues. And specifically, smaller picture, you know, you see some tension now between a Congress which is very aggressively promoting the notion that we need to support Israel, even if that makes the country appear in the eyes of the world one-sided. You know, the Congress is very clearly of that point of view, and frankly, it's not a Republican or a Democratic thing. The Congress
it is bipartisan.
It is a very bipartisan commitment to aggressively standing with Israel. Now, the executive historically has always had, you know, day-to-day responsibility for managing, you know, the president of Egypt or the king of Jordan. So I think, you know, there's a sense that perhaps there's a little bit of a difference between the executive and the Congress on that issue right now. But you know, we'll keep arguing. The Congress, though, is very, very, in a strong bipartisan way, committed to the support of our relationship with Israel.
By the way, just as a footnote, how do you feel about the fact that really beginning with the Vietnam War through the Afghanistan War, we have sent American men and women into combat without a formal declaration of war?
I'm very troubled by it, and I'm troubled by it as a member of Congress. And again, Article 1 of the Constitution is very clear that Congress declares war. And over, as you pointed out, over 50 or 60 years, that responsibility has moved more into the White House. I personally, and forget about my role as a congressman, think that we would get into a lot fewer ill-advised conflicts. I would hold Vietnam and Iraq up as examples if Congress took back some of that power. Now, this has been a long debate, the War Powers Act going back and forth and whatnot, but I do think that responsibility, unfortunately, has shifted too much to the White House. And for me, this was very personal when the president began bombing in Libya. That's clearly, I mean, look, I'm not a lawyer, but when you're bombing a different country, that's very clearly an act of war, in my, you know, humble opinion. And it was disturbing to me that there had not been more consultation with the Congress. Now, you know, looking back on the Libyan situation, of course, I think the president got it right. We didn't commit troops. You know, we worked with our allies. The Arab League was involved. The UN was involved. We worked with Europe. I think he got it right. But as a member of Congress, I say to myself, gosh, I don't want to wake up and discover that the president has committed our armed forces abroad without consulting with the Congress.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, by the way, Iraq. You did not mention Afghanistan. Why?
Well, Afghanistan's a bit different. First of all, you know, there was clear aggression against the United States in Afghanistan. The terrorists who hit us on 9/11, of course, trained and were housed there. And President Bush, to his credit, was very clear with the Afghani Taliban that give up these guys and cease your support of terrorism, or there will be implications. And of course, you know, they refused to do so. And so I regard Afghanistan in the beginning as, let's just say, quote, a just war. Now, unfortunately, you know, in the years that followed, the country got focused on Iraq, and our military resources went there, and I think that badly hurt our mission in Afghanistan. But Afghanistan was a different deal because we were going after some people who had attacked us.
Is it difficult for you as a Democratic congressman to take positions which in any way diverge from the administration's positions?
It's not difficult at all for me. You know, again, back to the Constitution, I agree with a lot of what this president stands for as a matter of values and policy. We are both Democrats. However, I remember two things each and every day. One is that my job is to represent the 750,000 or so people of the 4th District of Connecticut, all of whom have a slightly different point of view. And number two, again, back to the Constitution, you know, I am set up as a check and a balance to the President of the United States. So yeah, I agree with him on a bunch of things. But you know, I have quarreled with his point of view on Afghanistan. I was troubled by, although it was more complicated, the way we went into Libya. So no, particularly on foreign affairs, I'm going to think of myself as a representative and as a check and a balance on the President more than a guy who is just there to cheerlead him.
You know, Jim, there has been some concern in some sectors of the American Jewish community that in some way the current administration has been less stylistically, verbally supportive of Israel than prior administrations have been. I want to know if you have any take on that at all, and whether that brings you in any conflict with the administration.
It's not brought me personally into direct conflict with the administration. I've had my concerns. We are now, I'm sure we'll talk more about Iran and nuclear weapons development. We are now applying the kind of intense and severe sanctions that frankly I think we should have applied 3 years ago. I'm not sure why we didn't turn that needle up hard 3 years ago. I've never talked to the administration about that. And I understand that there is concern over the administration's position on Israel. And I don't know, frankly, what underlies that. It is clear to me, anyway, that the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States today don't have the same sort of personal warmth and friendship. In fact, that may be understated, that perhaps former leaders did. You know,
does it matter?
Well, it matters in the near term because the pro-Israel community in the United States needs to know that the United States government, the Congress, the executive, we are firmly devoted to our alliance and our friendship and our almost family-like relationship with Israel. That is moderated, I think, over time by the presidents, and I mean every president here, need to maintain credibility in the region to provide the kind of umbrella that the president provided when the Camp David Accords were signed. And what I mean by that is that if the United States is perceived by the rest of the world to simply be nothing other than a cheerleader for the state of Israel, if it lacks all credibility as a mediator to negotiations, those negotiations towards a two-state solution are going to be harder. That's a tension, I think, that the president feels more than the Congress. I mean, you know, the issue came up of, is Jerusalem the capital of Israel? It's not an accident that every president, Democratic and Republican, for the last, I think, 5 administrations, has said while running, Jerusalem's the capital of Israel. And yet when they get into that office, they recognize, geez, that's probably true, but something that needs to be negotiated by the parties. So when you sit in that seat, I think you're conscious of the need to be a real friend to Israel, but also the need to try to be a mediator and someday getting us to a peace agreement there.
Okay, come to Iran. The way the issue is now being framed is whether there should be any red line drawn, whether the United States administration should take a position that if Iran goes so far, whatever the far is, in enriching uranium, at that point they have gone too far, and that they're going to be subject to some form of American military response. Most likely not an invasion of ground troops, but some form of air attack on either Iran's nuclear facilities, if they are known where they are, or on its infrastructure to just create chaos in Iran. And we've just seen, as you and I are taping now, recently there was the UN General Assembly where obviously a series of heads of state came and spoke. The president spoke, then Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke, and the Prime Minister tried to say, with a drawing, there's a concept of a red line, and the United States has to be willing to draw it and say it out loud, and that the best chance of stopping Iran's nuclear program is not through sanctions, which have worked in terms of the economy, but have as yet not slowed down their nuclear program. Where do you personally stand as a United States congressperson when it comes to the issue of should the United States be willing to draw a red line?
Yeah, very, very challenging question. And let me not bury the lead here. From my own standpoint, I'm with the president behind the concept that it is intolerable that the outcome here is in Iran with a nuclear device. And I don't need to go into chapter and verse why that is, but we understand how destabilizing that would be to the region. We understand what a terrible national security threat that would be to the United States, much less Israel and frankly other actors in the region. Of course, on the flip side, we've got what we all acknowledge is the possibility of a military intervention that would almost certainly be catastrophic. I mean, closing the Straits of Hormuz, high energy prices, terrorist cells activated throughout the region in Europe, maybe here in the United States, attacks on Saudi Arabian oil fields, regional war, really a cataclysmic outcome. Now, it may come to that. We all, I think, hope not, but it may come to that. And by the way, a very vibrant debate here and in Israel of whether a military attack ultimately is not counterproductive. There's an awful lot of guys with stars on their shoulders who say, you know what, you attack Natanz, and what happens is the hidden and underground and hardened nuclear program gets accelerated. Anyway, that's a fair debate to have. The president has drawn a red line, a very clear red line, in saying that there will not be an Iranian nuclear bomb. So the question is, should that red line be moved to some other point of view? And frankly, I don't know that by point of view, I mean, is it X grams of uranium? Is it X percentage of 20% uranium? Should that be public? I draw on my own sort of experience as a negotiator in saying I think it's really important that the Iranians understand that there is a point beyond which they are very likely, if not certain, to face a military attack, some combination of the U.S., Israel, hopefully other players internationally if it comes to that. It's not clear to me that it's good for that to be public. It is clear to me that there are any number of stops along the way.
Well, I'm asking myself, what's the downside to making it public?
Well, I think the downside is all of a sudden now it becomes, rather than something that is privately understood between the United States and Iran, it becomes a public line in the sand at which now the United States, should that be crossed, and there is not an attack, now all of our credibility is gone. It's game over. And now it becomes sort of a slap in the face of the Iranian regime. And believe me, I'd love to spend my days slapping that regime in the face, but if let's imagine this, let's imagine that the regime is crumbling. And what they need is a show of strength. They perceive it. The way the Argentine generals, when they invaded the Falkland Islands, they were coming apart, they needed some show of strength. We could find ourselves at war because somebody needed to show resolve and strength rather than because there was a failure of negotiation. So again, I'm not sure I'm smart enough to know exactly where, capability is drawn, whether it should be public or private. I do know, and I would support, if all else fails, military action to prevent an Iranian bomb. That is not a tolerable outcome.
What the Prime Minister tried to point out was that it's hard to know the exact moment that Iran is poised to do whatever is the last piece in constructing this bomb. And that if you wait too long, you've waited too long.
Right.
And that seems to really be, from my perspective, what the difference in philosophy at the moment is. That Israel is saying, you can't wait to the last moment. And I think the United States is saying, we will not let it get to the last moment. But the United States tends to be talking about the last moment, and Israel is trying to talk about a line drawn before you get to the last moment. And the other point that the Prime Minister made was, while he has enormous regard for both Israeli and American intelligence, intelligence is not infallible. And that it's hard to know with certainty when you've reached that last point that somehow there has to be a buffer zone where you say you can't go beyond that. What you're saying is that may be being communicated to Iran, but in private. Am I correct that you, as a United States congressperson, are not privy to the information of whether, in fact, that kind of communication is being made to the Iranian government?
That's correct. I don't have any particular insight that I think the general public does not as to the back-channel communications that the United States might have with the Iranian regime. So no, I'm not speaking here from any particular...
This is done on an executive level.
Absolutely. I mean, we do have mechanisms to informally communicate with the players in Iran. And that gets interesting, doesn't it, right? I mean, this is a president, Ahmadinejad, who we all recognize as a madman. and by the way, a lot of his own people do, and it seems like maybe the supreme leader is tiring of him as well. And as we all saw last week, the currency devaluated 40%, creating an immense amount of agitation in the streets. A very complicated situation. And again, look, if I'm President of the United States, and as you said, I'm not privy to an awful lot of the information that is coming out of here, there would be some clear things where I would say this is intolerable. The IAEA has seals on a lot of the nuclear material there. They have inspectors on the ground. I would, for example, again, from my position of no special insight knowledge, regard the Iranians breaking those seals or kicking out the inspectors as a pretty clear indication that they were making a run for it. So again, if I was sitting in the Oval Office, which I'm not, there would be some pretty clear indicators at which I would say this has gone too far.
Okay. One more question on this issue. And again, you are an incredibly responsible congressman from a district with real live human beings. Does the American people understand enough about what Iran's obtaining a nuclear weapon would mean that they would be willing to put American lives at jeopardy in a military action? And the reason I ask this, Jim, is that some of my own sense is that it would be very, very hard, both politically and strategically, to literally, as you say, begin a cataclysm of consequences if there was a strike. And that although we say containment is not an option, I sometimes wonder whether we live with a nuclear Korea, we live with a nuclear Pakistan. Maybe there is a voice within the government that would argue it's not what we want, but it's the lesser of the two evils. Living with an Iranian nuclear armed country, and yes, in fact, treating them as we treat Korea or Pakistan or other countries, even the former Soviet Union. And that in reality, this notion that Iran is irrational is more rhetoric than substance. So I'm asking you finally, are you, as a congressman, saying you would send Americans into harm's way to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? Or maybe would you say there is a way which we could live with a nuclear Iran?
I don't happen to believe that this is a stable world. Let's not even talk about Israel, who would, of course, be the first target of an Iran with a weapon of mass destruction. I don't believe that this is a stable world if Iran, under this regime, has a weapon. Now, all of a sudden, Saudi Arabia is going to develop a weapon. Other regimes are going to develop weapons. Now we've got the tinderbox of the Middle East with everybody armed with nuclear weapons. That is just not an outcome I think we can live with. You ask a very important question, though, which I think casts a little bit of light on the whole discussion of red lines. My perception is, based on the polling that I've seen out there, is that there is almost no appetite in this country for another war in the Middle East. And by the way, an awful lot of the people who analyze these things have told us that, a regional conflict involving Iran, if you thought Iraq was bad, if you thought Afghanistan was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I think that is, in as much as people think about it at this moment in time when the economy is sort of forefront on people, I think that people are at best ambiguous about this, which is why I think if it comes to that, we need to be in a position, the President of the United States in particular needs to be in a position to explain that this is not North Korea. It is not Pakistan. Neither North Korea nor Pakistan have in the United Nations threatened the annihilation of a fellow UN member state. Iran is in a different category, but that story needs to be told. And that's another reason, again, I said this has sort of casts a little bit of light in the concept of red lines. If that story needs to be told, and if the American people need to become comfortable with the commission of our blood and treasure to such an effort, we need to be in a position to explain how urgent that is, rather than saying, gosh, I drew this red line 4 months ago and they crossed it, end of discussion. That's not the way this country, I think, wants to act internationally. No, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, that we talked about whether a red line should be public, where it should be. I think the Iranians, if they continue on their present course, they need to come to know more and more specifically what the implications of their actions are. But there is a whole process, as your question intimates, of explaining to the world how dangerous that as a possibility would be.
So right now you're running for re-election to a third term in Congress.
Believe it or not.
You're on the Financial Services Committee of the House. You've done a lot about debt reduction. If there were one thing you feel that intellectually separates you from your opponent, what is the major difference you wish voters in Connecticut understood about you and the race and where you stand?
I'm all for private initiative. Look, I went to work in business for 12 years. I worked hard. I had some success. I came out of a public school, single mom household. I get how powerful individual initiative is, how important entrepreneurs and small businesses are to our power and our economic strength in this country. But what he rejects and what I embrace is something that's been true in this country for 240 years, which is, yes, run with it. Individual initiative, small businesses, start a company, build it, as they say. But you know what? You do that because, like me, you got to go to a good public school. Like him, he was educated by the United States government and by local governments his entire career. Public schools, like me, you use roadways and railways and airports, and the FAA has something to do with whether you can fly safely across this country. We have always in this country said, go out there and succeed on your own. We're going to help you do that through educational infrastructures or through Pell Grants, through the GI Bill. And basically today they are saying, sorry, that all needs to go away.
Do you consider yourself soft on defense?
Absolutely not. I was in Lower Manhattan on 9/11. I was there, and I spent the day down there. I saw up close and personal what happens when the United States is attacked, and I'll tell you, there's not a day as a congressman that I don't think never again. And I have worked hard to support any number of things, improvement within the Department of Homeland Security, which is a big bureaucracy, urging, I don't, unlike my colleague Joe Courtney, I don't sit on armed services, but urging that we get out of Iraq as soon as possible, out of Afghanistan faster than we're currently scheduled to, because we need to, kind of start to pay attention to the next generation of security threats out there.
I have so much enjoyed meeting you and talking to you. I wish I had hours and hours with you. There are many, many other issues which I'd love to pick your brains about. You're in the midst of obviously a hard-fought election, and as I would say to your opponent, I wish you all the best. If it turns out you win, I hope you'll give me an opportunity to sit with you again and to talk to you about some of the issues that are confronting not only Jewish Americans, but America in general. And I wish you, we say in Hebrew, Kol Tuv Hatzlacha, all success to you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
On your own journey.
That.
You're really wonderful.
Thank you.
Very,
Appreciate that, man. And I will be back. I love these kinds of conversations.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Jim Himes, who's running for re-election in the 4th Congressional District in the state of Connecticut. I hope you've enjoyed meeting him. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. If you want to be in touch with Congressman Himes, you can do so by emailing me, and I will forward your emails on to him. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.